So what is this weird syndrome-looking moth? This is Sarctia echo, otherwise known as the echo moth, and it's the only species in the Sarctia genus. And that's not even the weirdest thing about this moth. Today marks the start of my new TerraCard series, where I'll be telling you about a species that is ecologically important, interesting, or I just took a photo of it, it looks cool, and I want to make a video about it. And I'm going to be ranking each species on these 4 stats on these Terra cards. Before we get started, I just want to give you a quick introduction. My name is Zach, and I graduated college last year studying coastal environmental science. I created Terra Unknown as this kind of passion project to explore photography, promote conservation, and really most importantly, making science accessible to everybody and make it interesting. And I also really want to donate to organizations that are making a difference in the world. So right now I'm partnered with Love Blue. It's a nonprofit focused on coastal protection, cleaning up plastic pollution, and I got involved in my local chapter at my college. It was a great experience, and I'd love to give back to that organization as part of Terra Unknown. So I'm going to be donating 10% of everything I make to that organization. So I believe that photography, especially this macro, extremely close-up, detailed photography, really has the power to change how we go about our lives and make us more aware of, this kind of world that lies under every footstep we take. That's kind of the tagline of Terra Unknown: is there's a whole world under every footstep. So that's really what I believe macro photography has the power to do. But I don't exclusively do macro photography. That's what I enjoy most, but sometimes there's a cool bird or a really cool landscape shot, so I like to do that every once in a while. But really with macro, there's nothing cooler than just snapping this close-up shot of a lizard and realizing that, oh yeah, dragons do exist. They're just way smaller than we actually imagine them to be. And before we get started, I want to mention just one more thing. I'm trying to do these videos in, very few takes, kind of minimal editing, because I think, mistakes are what makes us human. I'll leave some mistakes in, just so it's kind of just a conversation. We're talking about a cool species. I'm telling you pretty much about a cool bug I found. So let's go back to the echo moth. So I found this moth just sitting on the wall near a marina, and it really just stayed perfectly still, letting me take photos from tons of different angles. Later, I actually found some eggs, so I think this moth was probably getting ready to lay its eggs, just kind of conserving its energy. So it's a great photo subject. Initially, I really had no idea what this was. I'd never seen one before, even though I've lived in Florida my whole life. Maybe I just hadn't noticed it before, but after doing a lot of research and reading some, dense scientific articles, I found out that there are some really interesting things going on with this moth that you might not know just by looking at it. So this moth is exclusively found in 4 U.S. states: Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and Florida. These moths have actually kind of become superstars on the Stetson University campus, where they're called caterpillars, in reference to the school mascot. Like a lot of moths, they have hair all over their body, although their kind of mane going on is particularly impressive. The thing is, though, this hair isn't like the hair you have on your head. It's actually made out of chitin, the same material found on insect exoskeletons. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. But this hair can act as almost insulation, to prevent them from getting too cold, and also as a sound deadening material to absorb the bat's echolocation calls. So you can imagine throwing a basketball against a wall, bounces off nice and easy. You throw a basketball into a bush, it's just going to absorb right in. That's pretty much the same thing that's happening here. So what really makes these moths so unique, and why are they really only species in their genus? Well, first of all, these moths are part of a huge family of moths of over 25,000 species. Erbdae, I think that's how you pronounce it. And they're a member of the subfamily Arctinae, which are commonly known as tiger moths. looking at a side view of the echo moth, you can clearly see it's earned its place as the tiger moth with its rusty orange and white lines just running all along its wings. And it's a great example of aposematic coloration, which is the type of coloration you might see in poison dart frogs to warn predators of high toxicity. However, this moth actually takes in multiple toxins through the consumption of the kunti plant, including cytisine and BMAA. These, from what I saw, were neurotoxins, so you really don't want to be eating those. There is actually evidence, though, to suggest that the BMAA toxicity found in echo moths is not providing any sort of defensive benefit. Rather, it's an unintentional side effect of its diet. So in this study by Whitaker et al., and they set out to explore if the moth's toxicity was something known as defensive sequestration. Sorry, I got a little lost there, which is the integration of toxic plant compounds into tissues, mainly in order to become less palatable to predators. If you taste bad, if you're toxic, you're probably not going to get eaten. Usually, a species exhibiting defensive sequestration will concentrate those toxins in non-vital parts of the body. In limbs, definitely not in the head, because a neurotoxin will totally mess up your brain, and definitely not, in your abdomen area, because it'll just screw with your lungs and heart. But if a predator were to take a bite of one of these non-vital parts, it would taste bad. The moth could still go about its day, probably survive, and the predator will go away because it tasted bad. So what this research found, though, is that echo moths do not exhibit these patterns with the toxicity. BMAA was found, all over their body, actually kind of concentrated in their abdomen and head rather than their wings and legs, which would be most expected. So what we think is happening here is the echo moth is using cytisine, the other toxin, as its kind of defensive chemical, and then it's just accidentally taking in this BMAA. So through a limited geographic range, and a diet doesn't really follow the conventional rules of nature, and defensive sequestration, it makes sense that the echo moth is kind of in a genus of its own. It's a very strange species. Now it's time for the echo moth's TerraCard reading. I'll be rating this species in 4 categories: utility, energy, cycling, and keystone value. Utility is how a species shapes and builds the environment around it. A good example of this would be pollination by bees or filtration of water by oysters. I'm going to give the echo moth 3 out of 5 in utility because, as a natural consequence, flying from plant to plant, it's acting as a pollinator. That hair can also act to kind of catch pollen, spread it much more effectively. However, they're really not by any means the most specialized pollinator, like a bumblebee would be. So that puts them in a nice middle ground. Another thing we might be able to look at is population control of the kunti plant. While they might be controlling the spread of a toxic plant, that also means they're exposing predators to the toxin and kind of putting it out into the environment. They're also helping pollinate kunti plants. So I'm just going to ignore that aspect because I think of that kind of cancels out. The next category, energy, has to do with the importance of the species as either a predator or prey item. The echo moth is consumed by a surprising amount of predators, including most notably the Florida scrub jay, which doesn't seem to be fazed about the presence of the neurotoxins in its food. I like to think it might get a little kick out of it. There's a lot of evidence actually out there that animals enjoy getting high. So, I think maybe this might be the Florida scrub jay's way of doing that. In addition to the scrub jay, various mammals, insects, and arthropods also sometimes eat the echo moth. These species may have some kind of resistance to the toxins, don't care, or just eat the moth before they realize they're eating something nasty. While these species might feed on the echo moth occasionally, it doesn't seem like, If the echo moth went away, all these species would be hurting for food. So for this reason, it gets a rating of 2 out of 5, which is surprisingly high considering it does everything in its power not to get eaten. Cycling is closely related to energy, but describes the movement of essential or detrimental nutrients throughout an ecosystem. For example, decomposers are some of the most important nutrient cyclers. They turn dead, decaying material into simpler, more bioavailable compounds that can be used by plants. So, for thinking about harmful cycling, a good example of that would be plankton taking in harmful chemicals. And then fish eat just tons and tons and tons of plankton, and these toxins really bioaccumulate in the fish, making them unsafe to eat. The echo moth consumes 2 toxic compounds in the kunti plants, which may then be transferred to predators that feed on the moth. This toxicity can be seen even further up the food chain if any species becomes too reliant on the moth for any reason. So I'll be giving the moth a 3 out of 5 for cycling because it is somewhat spreading this toxin throughout the environment. I did struggle to find much information on this moth and its relationship with its predators, how much it's eaten, how much these predators actually rely on it. So I can't say for certain whether there would be any bioaccumulation of BMAA up the food chain, but if something happened to the ecosystem and something became very reliant on the echo moth, I could see that toxin making its way up the food chain possibly. And last but certainly not least, let's rate the keystone value of this species. A keystone species is one that can cause the entire collapse of an ecosystem if it is removed. So if we think about, in an ocean environment, mullet, they are like the food source for all larger predators. They're this essential link between the bottom of the food chain and the top of the food chain. You take the mullet away, everything, all those larger predators are going to struggle to survive. Plankton populations are going to spiral out of control. It's going to be this whole big disaster. So while the echo moth provides important ecological functions like pollination, and some species might eat it from time to time, removing it from the ecosystem is not really going to cause much of a collapse. It could, of course, affect the kunti plants, but overall in the ecosystem, it's not the most essential species, so I'm going to be giving it a keystone rating of 2 out of 5. So, wrapping up, let me know what you thought about these ratings, and if you'd change any of them, and feel free to give some more information if you know more about this moth in the comments. So, for my YouTube people, I have a really cool update to give you after initially finding this echo moth and deciding to make this video. So, I hinted at it before, but I found some eggs really close to this echo moth a couple days after I took photos. So I'm just going to pop this picture up here and show you that these eggs that I found, finally got to use my new toy on my camera, the Raynox DCR250. It's just like a magnifying glass put on an already really powerful lens. So check out this pattern on these eggs. It's really cool. This almost golf ball-like pattern. So let me know what you think that pattern is. I would think it could be something to do with heat or gas exchange in the egg, but I couldn't find much information about these eggs. So if you're an insect expert, let me know because I would love to hear about that. So anyways, that's all for the echo moth. And if you made it to the end, thank you so much. This is the first video I've made on YouTube and really putting my face out there. And I'd really appreciate any feedback you have for future videos. So, thank you.